Welcome to part 2 of the Disney Forgotten Rides Iceberg. If you are here before part 1, check the link in the description or click here to go watch part 1. Then, I'll see you guys back here when you're done. Before we dive into layer 3 of the iceberg, I have to give you guys a quick update on how the rest of the iceberg will be split. I did not anticipate how much information I would be saying for each item on the iceberg, and as of right now, layer 3 alone is around 15 to 20 pages, which for me equates to around 30 minutes to an hour of actual content. I can't realistically pump out hour-long weekly content because of the amount of editing that I put in my videos. So for the remainder of this series, I will be doing each layer alone in their own video. With that said, this video is only going to discuss the iceberg items in layer 3. Layer 3 goes over attractions that still technically exist, but they are either rethemed versions of the ride or they exist at another Disneyland park. But I'd say for the most part, these rides were Disney's attempts at recapturing the magic. Previous Autopia versions. So, we know Autopia as being that one ride that everybody wanted to get on as a kid, only to realize how freaking hard it was to steer these damn things. The Autopia we see today at the Disneyland Resort was not the only version that has existed. In fact, there were actually 4 other versions of the ride. There was the original Tomorrowland Autopia, Junior Autopia, Midget Autopia, and Fantasyland Autopia. Just to preface this part so there's no misunderstanding, the original Autopia that opened in 1955 is not the same track you guys see today. What you guys see today is the revamped version of the ride. The original Tomorrowland Autopia that premiered in 1955 featured a much smaller track than what we see today, as the one that we see today goes around Tomorrowland and Fantasyland. But the one in 1955 took guests on a route that went through only Tomorrowland, not Fantasyland. The initial success of the Autopia ride led to a big problem: the wait times and the lines. The lines became such a huge problem that Autopia's line began to clog up majority of Tomorrowland. The solution to this problem came in the form of another ride, Junior Autopia. Now the Junior Autopia opened in Fantasyland in 1956. This ride was the exact same experience you would get from going on the Tomorrowland variant, with one big difference. The Junior Autopia had a center guardrail to prevent accidents when driving. The reason this one opened was because of how packed the lines got for the original Autopia in Tomorrowland. Disney put this one out just to get lines down on the original Autopia in Tomorrowland. Disney wanted to make another Autopia ride in another separate land of the park in an effort to lure guests away from the original ride. Junior Autopia was initially a very big hit with guests. Because of this ride's initial success, Disney decided to revamp the ride to make it even better. They closed the ride in 1958 and reopened it under the name Fantasyland Autopia, obviously taking inspiration from the fact that it was in Fantasyland to begin with. Both Junior Autopia and Fantasyland Autopia were essentially the same exact ride, only this time, the Fantasyland variant was almost a complete duplicate of the Tomorrowland version, featuring the exact same theming and track layout as the original. In the year 2000, Disney announced a partnership with Chevron, and as a result, they scrapped both the Fantasyland and Tomorrowland Autopia in order to make a giant track for Autopia that went through both lands. This track is what we see today. Now, aside from those other 3 versions, there was one version that didn't last long called Midget Autopia. Midget Autopia was the kids' version of the ride. I know you're scratching your head because you probably thought that the original Autopia was made with the intention of only having kids in the driving vehicles, but that's not true. As you can see today, the ride was made for kids and adults to enjoy. The same cannot be said for the Midget version of the ride. Midget Autopia was a shrunken down version of the original Autopia, with the cars only being able to fit 2 small children in them at most. This attraction was located at the very edge of Fantasyland. It opened in 1957 but was quickly closed 9 years later in 1966. It was closed to make room for the ride It's a Small World. The ride featured the same style of track with a guardrail in the middle and much smaller vehicles. To be quite honest, It kind of sucks that It's a Small World replaced this ride, because I'm sure that kids nowadays would much rather go on this Autopia ride than the 5-minute snooze fest that is It's a Small World. Because honestly, who gets on It's a Small World to look at the scenery? I feel like this ride has always been the ultimate nap ride. Let me know in the comments if you guys also agree with this, and if you guys also went on any of the initial versions of Autopia. Let's go on to the next item. MuppetVision 3D. MuppetVision 3D is a film attraction that was shown off in the same style of Captain EO, in that you would have to wear these 3D glasses to watch it, and it was set inside of a big theater. The original attraction was located at California Adventure. The show had two main parts, the pre-show and the main show. The pre-show would start when you were in line for the attraction, as the queue for the ride acted as the backstage for the show. You would frequently see these monitors hanging everywhere on site, capturing glimpses of the Muppets frantically preparing for the experience that you were about to enjoy. Once you got inside the theater, guests were treated to a spotlight fixated on a balcony. The light revealed the Muppets, Statler and Waldorf, who would crack a few jokes, tell you the safety precautions and whatnot, and then the curtains would open and the show would start. The show itself was supposed to be Kermit the Frog taking the viewer through the Muppets' discovery of 3D technology. The show starts off with the promise of not showing any cheap 3D tricks, but that's not really kept up, as literally the next second they have a bunch of cheap 3D gags. There's a bit more nuance to the show, but I will leave a link below to anyone that wants to experience it for themselves. I don't want to spoil anything, so let's move on. Flik's Flyers / It's Tough to Be a Bug Show. So these rides were initially separated on the Iceberg, but I wanted to combine them together because they were previously mentioned already on my last video. Both of these attractions were part of the aforementioned Bugs Land. Flik's Flyers was a simple fair style ride. I will say I love the original design of this ride, as it looked like you were sitting inside regular everyday items. Only now, those regular everyday items were humongous. For example, there was a big Chinese food box and also kids snack boxes. The ride premiered along with other rides as part of the opening of a Bugs Land. Unfortunately, the ride would not last as the land would close. However, Flik's Flyers can still be enjoyed today, as it was reworked into Inside Out's Emotional Whirlwind. This ride is almost the exact same ride minus the aesthetics. Another attraction that was lost with the closure of a Bugs Land was the It's Tough to Be a Bug Show. This was the more prominent attraction of this forgotten land, as it's the original attraction that led to the development of a Bugs Land. The queue to the ride would take you underground into a dark cavern. Now, to be quite honest, the scenery for the show was actually really cool, and I wish I had gone to see it before it closed. Because just look at it. If a Bugs Land did one thing right, it really did make you feel as small as a bug. The film itself used theater lighting, 3D glasses, animatronics, and a lot of other special effects. The show was actually pretty short, running at only 9 minutes long, but there was actually a lot packed into those 9 minutes. As you grabbed your bug eyes and got seated to watch the show, it would begin with Flik appearing above the screen, explaining some facts about bugs. The show begins with demonstrations of fun facts about bugs, and later takes a darker, scarier turn when Hopper appears. He takes notice of the audience and declares that humans are bugs' biggest enemies. This is where the show gets most of its shock factor, as you get sprayed with liquid and then poked by the seat you were sitting on. I myself found this to be very unpleasant, but going a second time is way more fun, as you get to see everyone's first time reaction to them getting their butt poked. The show ends on a happy note, explaining how the world needs bugs. If you want to experience the show yourself, the show still exists today in Walt Disney World. Let me know your own personal experience with the It's Tough to Be a Bug Show in the comments. Moving on. Paradise Pier. Paradise Pier premiered in February of 2001 along with the opening of Disney's California Adventure. Paradise Pier technically still remains at the park today, only now it has been reskinned and renamed to be Pixar Pier. Although it was called a pier, it's more like a waterside area of the park. The pier had the same rides we know today and grew through the years that it was there. The first of many rides to come to Paradise Pier was California Screamin', which we now know today as the Incredicoaster. By the way, before we move on, who else loved California Screamin' better than the Incredicoaster? Because how can you not fall in love with this sound?
And away you go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1!
Like this video if you're with me on this one. Then, in 2008, we got Toy Story Mania. We also had the Sun Wheel, which was just a glorified Ferris wheel. This Ferris wheel has actually gone through many changes itself. It went from the Sun Wheel to Mickey's Fun Wheel, and now is known as Pixar's Pal Around. Later in 2010, we would see the introduction of many other rides, most notably the World of Color, Silly Symphony Swings, Goofy Sky School, and finally the last addition at the time, which was the Little Mermaid ride, Ariel's Undersea Adventure. All of these rides are still there today at Pixar Pier. Some of them, as stated before, have had their names changed. The original Paradise Pier also had these really lovely posters everywhere. The best part of the walk was after crossing the bridge to get to where California Screamin' and Toy Story Mania was. The scenery that was found here was very much California, with the posters, billboards, and shops all being themed around the sunny weather that California is known for. I personally love the original Paradise Pier more so than the Pixar Pier that we have today. If you got to experience it yourself, comment below with your own personal stories about the pier. Moving on. Mulholland Madness. Mulholland Madness was the original roller coaster in the far corner of Paradise Pier. Today we see this coaster as Goofy Sky School, but when a California Adventure premiered in 2001 with Paradise Pier, Mulholland Madness was the original name and theme of this ride. The coaster uses the same exact track as Goofy Sky School. The biggest differences here are in the appearance of the ride. Mulholland Madness was based off of the famous road in Hollywood known as Mulholland Drive. This road was named after the Los Angeles civil engineer William Mulholland, and the road itself is very well known to have extensive views of Hollywood. There is even a few points on this road where there are designated locations to stop so one can see the view. Mulholland Madness, however, didn't really try to capture these scenic views that the road was known for. Instead, they opted for a more fast-paced version which matched the frequent turns and speed of what it would be like to drive through Mulholland Drive. The scenery, if you can really call it that, was just a few billboards here and there with a fuck ton of caution signs everywhere. To be fair though, I think the ride was actually really hard to theme because of the location and the size of the ride. Also, the fact that it was outside meant that it was really hard to give that Mulholland Drive feel, as it meant you'd have to change everything around the ride to look like Mulholland Drive, and obviously that would be pretty expensive and redundant. Also, just on a side note, apparently there were 3 accidents that came about on Mulholland Madness, but there's not much information that can be found on them besides from this newspaper, which outright states that there were 3 accidents. These accidents, however, did not lead to them changing the ride to Goofy Sky School, as this article states the accidents were in 2001 and Mulholland Madness wouldn't close until 2010. I think it was for the best that Mulholland Madness would close for Goofy Sky School, because Goofy Sky School does a better job with the theming and overall color scheme. I love going on Goofy Sky School and most likely would have loved the earlier version of the ride if I ever went on it. Let me know your own personal experience with this ride in the comments. Moving on. Swiss Family Treehouse. So this one actually took me by surprise. I didn't even know this was a thing, as I always believed that the attraction that sits there today was the original. So in November 18th, 1962, a treehouse attraction aptly named the Swiss Family Treehouse premiered in Adventureland. The treehouse was based on a movie that came out in the 1960s titled Swiss Family Robinson. If you haven't seen the movie, basically a Swiss family is relocating elsewhere via a ship, but then they get attacked by pirates. The crew that was on board abandoned the ship, leaving the family to fend for themselves. Eventually, the ship lands them on an uninhabited island. The family then decides to construct an elaborate treehouse in order to provide apt safety and comfort. This is where the inspiration for this attraction came from. This attraction is one of the few walk-through attractions, which basically means instead of sitting down on some vehicle or mechanism, you physically have to walk through the attraction to get the full experience. The attraction showcased many iconic parts from the movie, such as the complex water wheel that the family made, the treehouse rooms taken from the movie, and also gave you a nice view of Adventureland from atop of the treehouse. When this ride opened in 1962, It initially required a C ticket, and if you watched my last video, you should know these tiers. The funny thing about this ride is that it's one of the few rides that got demoted from one ticket tier to a lower ticket tier. This attraction going from a C tier ticket to a B tier ticket in 1966. Just so everyone is aware, the way the tiers worked was E as the best tier, then D tier, C tier, B tier, and lastly A tier, which had the least popular rides. The ride stayed at Disneyland for quite some time, but unfortunately for the Swiss family, the ride would change in 1999 to what we now see today as Tarzan's Treehouse. I always thought from a young age that the attraction was always originally Tarzan's Treehouse and never knew about this Swiss family ride. If you want to see the original attraction in all of its glory, it's still a public attraction at a few of the Disney parks around the world. It can be seen at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, Tokyo Disneyland, and Disneyland Paris. If you got a chance to see this ride in person, leave a comment below sharing your personal experience. Moving on. General Electric's Carousel of Progress. General Electric's Carousel of Progress was brought to Tomorrowland in July 2nd of 1967. Now the ride has an interesting history that I wanted to touch on beforehand. As you can tell, General Electric sponsored this ride, which isn't too weird as Disney has always had sponsorships, like with the Autopia ride and the People Mover. However, the Carousel of Progress was not the original ride that General Electric wanted. General Electric and Walt Disney got together to draw up a brand new land called Edison Square. The land was originally drawn up as part of an expansion to Main Street, USA. The expansion was to feature two districts. One district called International Street, which would have been regular old Main Street renamed, and a new section called Edison Square. Edison Square was to have rides all themed around electricity with General Electric as the sponsor. The signature attraction was to be called General Electric's Harnessing the Lightning, which was to feature a cast of animatronics telling the story and advancement of technology. Unfortunately, this project was scrapped due to General Electric facing a lot of legal action and damage to its reputation at the time. In an effort to restore their reputation, GE reached out to Walt Disney once again, only this time it was to develop a show for the company's pavilion at the 1964 New York World's Fair. Disney obviously jumped at this chance, and now we have what we know today as the Carousel of Progress. So this ride actually did not originally premiere at Disneyland. It instead premiered at the 1964 New York World's Fair. The original Carousel of Progress at the New York's World Fair was such a big hit that the next year it was brought back and was given its own massive covered queue on an empty lot in order to protect visitors from New York's hot summer sun. Because of the huge success, Disney actually brought the attraction to Disneyland on July 2nd of 1967 as a part of the new Tomorrowland. Now enough with history, what was the actual experience like? The ride gained a lot of success because of its unique way of telling its story. Instead of being on a vehicle that moved you through the ride, it felt as though the ride was moving around you. You would walk inside a 200-seat theater and sit down for the attraction. Once inside, the show would start with its first act. Each act following would spin their way into view. The ride was split into 5 scenes in this circular formation, with the first scene starting just before the 1900s, with each progressing act taking place further and further into the future. It took you through the dawn of the 1900s, the 1920s, the 1940s, and then it would take you into some unspecified time beyond 1967, which was the original debut year of the ride. Finally, the ride would end with you in Progress City. Now the coolest thing about the ride aside from the show was that once you exited, you could take a ramp up to a second floor, and on this second floor you were given an up close and personal view of the animated moving Epcot Center. At the time, the only way to see this Epcot Center was on the People Mover, but thanks to the Carousel of Progress, you can now view it in all of its glory up close. The reason this ride closed was because of General Electric. GE surveyed the ride goers of the Carousel of Progress and found that almost everyone on the ride was local Anaheim residents and returning park goers. Obviously to them, this was bad marketing, as showing the same person the same product isn't going to make you that much money. They approached Disney with the idea to move the ride to their new Magic Kingdom in Florida. This was done to gain new exposure to a new audience. In 1973, the Carousel of Progress was closed and replaced by a new show, America Sings. But I won't get into that show here because that's a bit further down on the iceberg. You can still enjoy the Carousel of Progress at Walt Disney World to this day. Let me know if you guys got on the original Carousel of Progress in Disneyland. Moving on. Star Tours. So if you go to Tomorrowland often, then this entry might confuse you, as you should know that Star Tours is still up and running. But what you might not know is that what you see today is actually a rendition of Star Tours called Star Tours The Adventures Continue. The original name, which was just simply Star Tours, was a much more tame and less cool version than what we see today. The original ride had a soft opening with limited guests being invited to ride it in 1986, with the official opening happening later the next year in January 9th of 1987. This ride was widely anticipated as it had a lot of hype leading up to it, as Star Wars is obviously massively popular. The original idea for Star Tours came from these flight simulators, which were shown to Disney Imagineers in hopes of them using it for an attraction. Even though at the time, the simulators gave Imagineers motion sickness because of the mismatched visuals of the ride, the Imagineers loved the concept and kept it in the back of their minds. Eventually, George Lucas would be approached by Disney to make a Star Wars themed ride using these flight simulators. Lucas loved the idea and signed off almost immediately. Then it was time to put the ride in action. Instead of creating a whole new ride, Disney decided to get rid of the Adventure Through Inner Space ride at Tomorrowland and put the new Star Tours ride there. This was actually the hardest part at the time because this meant that the flight simulators had to be lowered in from above the show building. Any small snap or mishap would destroy the $500,000 ride vehicles. Even harder than constructing the actual ride and the building theme was the production of the film that would play in each vehicle. You have to keep in mind that at the time, CGI was in its baby phase. So what this meant was that the production team had to shoot the film the same way that the Star Wars films were made, by filming with small miniature set pieces. However, because the ride was supposed to be one big long shot, this meant that they couldn't film exactly like they did for the movies, with lots of cuts being thrown in. They had to film the ride in one long take. Individuals involved in this process explained that it was way more challenging and complex than shooting the original Star Wars movies. Once the ride was finished, the ride finally premiered, and in Disney fashion, the wait times were longer than ever. I mean, just take a look at this picture. This isn't just a random crowd at Disneyland. This is the actual line for the ride. Queues for the ride are said to have stretched all the way down to Main Street, and rightfully so, as stepping inside the building calmed your doubt on whether the ride would be worth the wait. The inside of the building was designed to look like a droid repair shop. There was supposed to be more animatronics, but due to budget cuts, Imagineers began taking animatronics from other rides and using their endoskeletons as props. A notable example was this quadruplet of birds from the America Sings ride being downsized to a trio, as one of the birds was stripped to its endoskeleton and used in its animatronic form in this ride. This became more apparent if you took a look at its feet. Funny enough, this is actually still in the ride to this day. If you guys go to Star Tours nowadays, I just went last week to Disneyland, you can still see this webbed feet endoskeleton in the queue to this day. Once you're done waiting in line, you actually get to go inside the ride. Now, getting inside the ride vehicle is basically the same. You wait for the doors to open with a video playing and then you board. Now, there are some major differences between this version of Star Tours and the new version of Star Tours. The new version of Star Tours has 54 different variations, while the original Star Tours only had one. And instead of being led by C-3PO, it was led by a robot simply named Rex. Once the ride began, Rex would explain that you will be getting a tour of the planet Endor, but unfortunately, Rex wasn't that competent as he quickly gets the riders into dangerous situations. The ride has multiple situations where you get out of danger and then are thrown back into it, and then you get back into danger again, and it just repeats itself over and over again. Eventually, you get to the ride's most iconic scene, joining the Rebel Alliance and taking down the Death Star, which, by the way, makes no sense in the context of the movie, as the events of this ride technically take place after Return of the Jedi, but I guess Disney just ignored continuity because who the fuck cares? The ride would finally come to an end with one last thrill where you almost collide with a fuel truck. I admit, I do have some invaluable nostalgia when it comes to the original ride, but obviously the new Star Tours version is not even comparable. It's so much better with the 3D glasses and the cool twist at the beginning of each ride, which I don't want to spoil here if you have not ridden it yourself. But if you know, you know. I will say that I found it a bit underwhelming towards the end of its lifespan, but it still holds a special place in my heart as one of my favorite rides of all time. Comment below if you got to ride the original Star Tours in all of its glory. Moving on. Country Bear Jamboree. Country Bear Jamboree opened in Disneyland in 1972. It was the centerpiece to the newest land known as Bear Country. The ride was a complete clone of the Walt Disney World variant with almost no difference in the two rides. Crazy enough, to get on the ride, you would actually need an e-ticket. The experience was just a simple show presentation. You would sit down in a theater and just watch these lifelike country bears play old country songs. A fun fact about this project was that much like the Carousel of Progress, this attraction was planned to be part of an entirely different project before being brought to any Disneyland park. The origins of the Country Bears dates back to a forgotten Disney project in the 1960s for a ski resort in Mineral King Valley. Walt Disney wanted his ski resort to include some entertainment, and so the Country Bear Jamboree attraction was born. Unfortunately, Walt's death in 1966 meant that this idea would never pan out, but the concept for the show would live on as it was brought to the Magic Kingdom shortly after. Then Disneyland would follow in its footsteps and bring it there in 1972. The ride was closed in September of 2001 to make way for the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which is still going on in the theme park today. Not much else to be said. Moving on. Tower of Terror. The Tower of Terror is an absolute classic amongst Disney park goers. How could you not love the feeling of driving to Disneyland and know that you were getting close because you could see the Tower of Terror peering over the entire skyline? The Tower of Terror premiered at Disneyland's California Adventure on May 5th of 2004. It was placed in the corner of Hollywoodland where the building remains to this day. The original ride was based on the Twilight Zone, with the ride being aptly named the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. Walking up and going inside this ride was completely daunting if you didn't know what to expect. The outdoor queue starts with 1930s jazz music as you make your way through the rotten and overgrown gardens. Passing through the hotel's front door, you get the sense that this hotel hasn't been touched since its closure, with dust and cobwebs being littered everywhere throughout the attraction. Guests were ushered into the hotel library with bellhops of the hotel, informing them that their rooms just weren't ready yet. Everyone that worked this ride always had the same gloomy feel, which honestly made the ride feel so much scarier. It felt as if you had really entered this dark hotel. Once inside the library, the power goes out and then a video would play explaining how one fateful night, a lightning storm hits the elevators, which caused 5 people to mysteriously vanish from the premises. The television then turns off, and guests are directed through to the boiler room. The elevator opens and you get on the ride. The ride would start off very dark with a narrator explaining how you have now entered the Twilight Zone. The ride vehicle would move around to another area. Suddenly, you'd be taken up to the next floor. This time, the narrator talks about what happened to those aforementioned 5 people. Following this was more spooky narration about how your group is the next to die. Then the ride would jump you up and down freefall style and famously take you up to the top where you get a wonderful view of California Adventure, ending with you dropping completely to the bottom back to where you started. The narrator would end the ride off stating how you should be more careful when choosing what hotel to stay with. If you got a chance to ride the Tower of Terror, you know how freaking awesome it was. The set design and the overall ride experience was just unmatched by everything else in California Adventure. Nowadays, the ride has been changed into Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, which is just a breathtaking building to see in person. But I honestly still miss the old Tower of Terror. It's definitely my nostalgia saying this, but the Tower of Terror never failed to give me chills. Thankfully, the new ride does hold up immensely well and even got the Star Tours treatment, having 6 different drop sequences on the ride. So each time you get on it, you are likely to have a different experience. Comment below if you share the same nostalgia as me with the old Tower of Terror. Moving on. Disneyland, the first 50 magical years. I'm sure you all remember that one building on Main Street that says, "Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln," the big building with the red sign. Well, for a brief period of time, from May 5th, 2005 to March 15th of 2009, the film was actually replaced with another film simply called Disneyland, the first 50 magical years. The feature was shown in the Opera House Theater. It featured Donald Duck and actor Steve Martin. I believe Steve Martin was chosen to shoot this as he had a personal experience with the Disneyland park, having worked at Merlin's Magic Shop around the late 1950s. The film's runtime was around 17 minutes and took the viewer on a journey through Disneyland's history and how it's changed throughout the years, showing the viewer the land that Disneyland was built on before and after its creations, explaining how Walt's vision for the Disneyland Resort came to fruition in just 1 year. The film was brought on board in light of Disneyland's 50th anniversary celebration in 2005. It would only last 4 years and was closed in 2009 to make way for the return of Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. I believe this film is still actually intact and is shown on a nearby television in the Opera House Theater. I may be wrong about this last part, but I'm pretty sure I've gone in there myself and seen this film being played on a loop. If you guys haven't seen the film, I will leave a link below as it's a pretty good history film on how Disneyland was built. This brings us to the end of the video. I wanted to apologize for splitting the iceberg into so many parts. If you guys actually enjoy this more informative style of doing my icebergs, leave me some feedback below in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe for more iceberg content and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Consider watching my other video essay style videos. I just put one out on a lost episode of Ed Netty. With all of that said, I will see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.